Oh, geez, we forgot again. All right, thanks, John. So, what I wanted to mention is like, as usual, we encourage everyone to use the chat window the entire time that we're giving this talk. If you find that window disturbing, you can pull it to the side or minimize it. But why don't we get started? I see a lot of people are putting in their names and where they're calling in from. I'm in Florida, still in Orlando, but I wanted to welcome. We have three speakers today, and I want to welcome our first speaker, which is Stephen G. Stephen, you out there?
Yep.
Here he is. He's going to give us everything we need to know about Paul Williams. Take it away, Stephen.
All right. All right. Hopefully you're seeing my screen. My name is Stephen G. I've written a number of books on Los Angeles history. Most recently, this one that celebrates the work of Paul Williams is featured in the Architectural Digest. I worked on this along with Mark Appleton and Brett Parsons. Paul Williams is a remarkable person for many reasons. The idea that the orphan son of an African-American fruit and vegetable seller would go on to become one of the most dominant architects in American residential architecture at a time when the system was entirely rigged against him is truly an improbable story. Williams was a remarkably prolific architect who worked on more than 3,000 projects in a near 6-decade career. As you may know, he was the first African-American member of the American Institute of Architects. It was that organization's first African-American fellow. He was, as his colleague Jay Johnson described him, a master of creative eclecticism. He mastered numerous styles, and despite his early work being limited by the conventional demands of his clients, Williams was an innovator. He would experiment, and we'll talk about some of the ways in which he experimented as we kind of go through the evolution of his career. Williams began his career by working with some of the giants of Southern California architecture, Reginald Johnson, Arthur Kelly, and John C. Austin. And he established his office in own practice in 1922. And part of the reason that he was able to establish his own practice is because he established himself as what he described as a small home specialist. And he was able to do that because he'd had success both locally and nationally in numerous competitions. And it's by studying these competitions that we see the evolution of elements that would become part of Williams' signature style. Now, we don't have time to talk about all of those competitions, but this one is important. This is a 1920 competition for an entry for a competition for the Los Angeles Examiner to design a California house that cost less than $3,000. This design is significant because this house was actually built in Sierra Madre. And if we study it, we see the beginnings of Williams' design in the sense that at the time, Williams said that the main focus of a Southern California house was always at the front, and the backyard, in his words, was for chickens. And he kind of reversed that concept by making the front attractive, but recognizing that in Southern California's unique indoor-outdoor lifestyle, that the main focus of the house should really be at the back. And you start to see in his floor plans that he moves the kitchen to the front of the house and the lounge and the dining room to the back to allow you to enjoy the back of the house. This design was significant also because it got the attention of a former senator, now real estate developer, Frank Putnam Flint, who commissions Williams to design a series of residences in an area that he was developing north of the San Rafael Hills called Flint Ridge. And Williams would design 32 houses in Flint Ridge, including the John Bishop Greenhouse, the Flint Ridge Company House, and later a house for Catherine Flint's wife. And what we see in these houses is that very early on in his career, Williams clearly has a mastery of harmonious proportions. He clearly has a mastery of different architectural styles. But we also see an answer to that often asked question: how was it possible that Williams got to design all these lavish mansions for so many different celebrities and rich folks in LA? And the simple answer to that question is because of the pedigree of the people that he trained with, because of the incredible submissions that and success that he had in these various different competitions. Williams was designing these kinds of extravagant mansions almost from the beginning of his career. I want to briefly focus on one structure that isn't a residence to give you an idea of a trend that goes throughout Williams' career. This is the YMCA at East 28th Street. Williams had been a cadet at the Y on 9th Street, and he was determined that he would compete for this competition, not on any sentimental grounds, but because he wanted to be judged on his own merits. And the reason that he was selected to design this building was because it was believed he could give it a more home-like feel. And this is a trend that you see throughout Williams' career, whether it's the MCA building in Beverly Hills, whether it's the Saks Fifth Avenue department store. Williams is brought in because it is believed he can give a building a more home-like appeal, which brings us to the first house that Williams designed that was featured in the Architectural Digest. This was the Bachman House, designed and built in 1927, featured in the Architectural Digest in 1930. Walter Bachman had various important business interests in the city, and the Bachmans bought this land for this house directly from G. Allen Hancock, who developed the neighborhood of Los Angeles that you probably know as Hancock Park. And we often talk about why was Williams Williams not being able to live in the neighborhood or the houses that he designed, and what did that mean in a very practical basis? And if we look at this specific house, there is a contract between Hancock and Juliet Bachman that says quite simply, said property shall not at any time be lived upon by any person whose blood is not entirely that of the Caucasian race. And I think we look at something like 30 residences in this book, and pretty much all of them before 1940 had some kind of language that basically equated to that. The design of the house was a Spanish colonial house. Here you see a wonderful sort of Chigger-esque panel above the main entrance. Reginald Johnson, who Williams had worked for, designed numerous houses just like this. So Williams was really building on that experience. I included this next house because it is the perfect entryway to discuss how Williams looked at the world. What was his basic philosophy? This is a house that Williams designed in 1929 for Jack Overcoat Atkin. Jack Overcoat Atkin got the nickname Overcoat because he never left home without one. He arrived as a teenager aboard a clipper ship from England. He gained success first as a bookmaker and later as a horse breeder. And he comes to Williams with this idea that he wants a house that resembles a castle that he had known growing up in England. And I want you to think about that, what it's like as an architect to get that kind of request, and then think about it in context from this quote that came from Williams' former boss, Arthur Kelly, in an interview given around the time that Williams would have worked for him, where he says, "There seems to be a general feeling among the laymen that the architect will not let them have what they want in their house because it will spoil the architecture effect of it, or some such thing as that. My notion has been to get exactly what my client wants in their houses, but do it in the proper way so there can be no objection from an architectural standpoint." This philosophy is almost identical to a philosophy that Williams held, that if I give a client what they want, then I'm a good architect. So think about this. Williams gets a client, a wealthy client that wants a house like a castle. Williams responds with a house that has Gothic archways, numerous coats of armor, and other references to nobility, but otherwise it's entirely architecturally pleasing. It's an elegant house that sadly burned down in 2005 in the midst of an extensive renovation. At the time, it was owned by Michael Hammer, the grandson of Armand Hammer, who said you could never replace what was left. And clearly that's correct. You may look at this next house and think, why would he include that? It's not a particularly unusual house. You might think it's not a particularly interesting house. It's a modern take on a California ranch home. And it's not interesting until you think, well, literally every element of this house that could be made of steel is made of steel. So it has steel paneling, a steel window frame, a steel roof, steel doorways, steel in the foundations. And rather unsurprisingly, it's called the Steel House. It was one of two houses that Williams designed for the 1936 California House and Garden Exhibition on Wilshire Boulevard and Spalding. Williams was only one of a small handful of architects, including his former boss, Arthur Kelly, including Richard Neutra, who were asked to design houses for the exhibition. Williams was the only architect asked to design two houses for the exhibition. The Steel House was produced in collaboration with Lear Steel, the Lear Steel Company, and numerous replicas were sold. The other house that Williams completed for the exhibition was the French House. This time it's steel framed, covered by plaster. The Architectural Forum somewhat sarcastically noted that the house was French only in its vaguely French reminiscent roof and the potted plants outside the front door. I included this house because this house is pure Paul Williams on so many levels. It was described at the time as modernized Georgian. Williams was a master of reinventing historical styles in interesting new ways. Outside, you could find numerous historical references, but inside we often had an entirely modern floor plan. Charles Correll at the time was one of the most famous radio voices in America. He was a part of a comedy duo with Freeman Gosden known as Amos and Andy. They both played African-American characters, even though they were both white guys. Now, I said this is pure Paul Williams. Williams is about harmonious proportions. He's about undulating lines, curved lines. And if you walk into this Williams house, and I'm focusing particularly on the top image, you have to go through an oval portico, which is pure Williams, into an oval reception hall, again, pure Williams. And inside that oval reception hall, we have a wonderful curved staircase, pure Williams, leads out to a sympathetic porch, again, pure Williams. The back of the house is the playroom and the dining rooms, rooms that embrace the outdoor space. And again, you see at the front, the kitchen's moved to the front. Here we have a close-up of what that oval reception hall and staircase look like. Now, I spend a lot of time talking about how Williams designed expensive houses or expensive structures for incredibly wealthy people. But it's important to remember that he was a socially conscious designer. In the mid-1930s, he worked on Langston Terrace, one of the first federally funded housing projects of its kind. And in 1940, he works on Pueblo del Rio. As you can see, the clean lines, flat roofs, the complex was built for nearby factory workers and veterans. The grid-like streets led to almost inevitable comparisons to housing projects in Germany. And this would later be described as Williams' most unorthodox work. But what really sticks in my head and always screams at me every time that I look at these buildings is that Williams was the chief architect. He was in charge of the project, and the other architects that worked on this project included Richard Neutra, Welton Beckett, Gordon Kaufman, Adrian Wilson. Truly a dream team of Southern California architecture. Now, by 1940, there is a noticeable shift in Williams' practice. 60% of his work is now commercial, 40% of it is residential. And Williams, when he's asked to explain the difference, what's happening, he says, well, basically, I've designed so many houses for so many rich people that it is inevitable that commercial opportunities would follow. The architecture buffs watching this will, of course, recognize that on the left of this image is A. Quincy Jones, who worked for Williams between 1939 and 1940, collaborated with Williams on the design of the Roosevelt Naval Base in Long Beach. And in the mid-1940s, they come together to form a practice for the purpose of designing clubs and hotels. And the more than 20 projects that they will work on again shows Williams' desire and ability to experiment. And this, one of these more than 20 projects includes the Palm Springs Tennis Club. And Williams and Jones transform what had been a relatively traditional structure into a modern structure that embraces its desert location. They add a dining room, cocktail lounge, and other structures. And they really treat this project as a continuous laboratory of new techniques, new materials. And if you want to see what a collaboration between Jones and Williams looks like in one picture, this is it, the bar looking out onto the swimming pool. You see these wonderful undulating lines of the bar, pure Williams, that look through these dramatic walls of glass, pure Jones. Now, like many Southern California architects, Williams' post-war designs evolved to include modern elements of designs, open floor plans that maximize natural light. This is the Tevis Morrow House built in Pacific Palisades in 1947. Morrow was an oil baron. You see here flat roofs, clean lines, and yet we still have this undulating entranceway to the front door, pure Williams. And if we look at the back of the house, you see again that principle from Williams that life in a Southern California house truly happens at the back. The dining room, the lounge, all the areas that are fun in the house are at the back, looking out on this wonderful swimming pool. And again, we have this wonderful curved stairway, and another pure element of Williams' design. I don't have time to talk about the incredible house today that Williams designed for Frank Sinatra. His work on the Golden State Life Mutual building, or his work on the First AME Church, all of which showed off his mastery of modern design. But you can read about them in this book. And now I get the pleasure of handing off to Jana, who understands, I guess, more than anybody, that Paul Williams' success was really down to his attention to detail. So Jana, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It was so wonderful to hear you talk about Williams's work. It's always such a pleasure to hear you talk about his work. And it's so neat that we both publish books about Williams in a relatively short amount of time, and that we so often get to see each other at these things. So hi, my name is Jana Ireland. I'm an artist. I'm not an architect. I'm not a historian. I am someone who is giving a sort of interpretive view of Paul Williams's work. So I am here with my husband and children, and my 3-year-old hears me talking, so he's decided to come over and start making noise, even though he was perfectly content a minute ago. So he'll speak with me a little bit as I do my presentation. All right.
Why isn't he talking? Why did he talk? What did he talk? Why did he talk? Where was he? Why didn't he talk?
So I began this work about Paul Williams in late 2016. I was asked to do some work about Paul Williams by the architect Barbara Bester, who runs the Julius Schulman Institute at Woodbury University, and they do some projects related to architectural photography. Barbara realized that there wasn't a lot of work that was accessible to people about Paul Williams, but that there was so much to look at and so much to think about. And she wanted someone to do some of that work. So she invited me to do this project. And I spent a little over a year photographing Williams buildings for this project, which ended up in an exhibition at the gallery that Woodbury has. And then I just kept working on it. The work was still so compelling to me, and it felt like there was still so much more to look at, so much more to uncover about Williams's work. So I began to hear from people about Williams structures that they had connections to as I kept working on the project. So maybe an article would come out about my work, and then I would get emails from people who own Williams houses, or I would give a talk somewhere and I would get a business card from someone, and that would lead to something else. And the project just kept growing and growing and growing. And eventually I met the publishers of Angel City Press. I sat down with them and had a conversation, and they decided to publish a book of my work. So this book regarding Paul R. Williams, A Photographer's View, came out in September of last year. And it is a collection of many of these photographs that I've made of Williams structures over the last several years. As I said, I'm an artist. I'm not an architect. I'm not someone who studies architecture, or not someone who writes biographies. So what I'm doing here is giving you my interpretation of his work. It's not a book that is in chronological order or that collects several photographs from one structure here with text and then photographs from another structure and so on. As you go through the book, you'll see photographs from different structures mixed together. And I guess the experience is almost like this video where the work is just kind of washing over you as you go through, and you get a bit of a sense of how versatile he was and the scale of his work. That approximately 3,000 projects that he designed over the course of his 50-year career in all sorts of different genres. There are many, many houses in many different styles. There are public buildings, there are churches, there are schools, there are funeral homes, there are housing projects. There is just really an incredible amount to look at. Here's the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance building, which Stephen just mentioned and showed a picture of, which was a really important building in the Black community in Los Angeles at the time Williams was alive, and which he had the incredible opportunity to design a brand new building for. And it's still standing and still serving the community, even though the company itself is out of business. And then there were also things like this grand home in La Cañada Flint Ridge that really showcased different parts of his range. And in this work, I wanted to be able to look closely at details like this, or like this one that you see here, because he designed in so many different styles and in so many different eras. There is a lot to look at. There are all kinds of different colors of paint and different roofs and different styles, and photographing them in black and white allowed me to kind of unify all of those different parts. And photographing small details allows a structure that is designed in one style to coexist on a page opposite from a structure designed in a completely different style, and still show you what he could do, show you what he was interested in, show you his level of skill. Or at least that is my intention in this work, to really shine a light on the incredible amount of attention to detail and beauty in this work that he did over the course of this very, very long career. One of the wonderful things about working on this project has been watching his name become more and more recognized. He's someone who always had a lot of fans. He died in 1980, and there were some books about his work, and there are people in Los Angeles who are always interested in his work, but a lot of people who are very interested in architecture or in Black history or in the history of the city of Los Angeles did not know his name when I began this work. And right after I started this project, he was posthumously awarded the AAA Gold Medal. There have been lots of articles about the work. His archive was acquired by the Getty Research Institute and the USU School of Architecture last year. So that has generated a lot of excitement about his work. And suddenly it feels like his name and his work is everywhere. And his influence, which has always been everywhere in Los Angeles, is beginning to be more and more understood. And it has been such a pleasure to watch that, and such a pleasure to be part of that process and to help people learn about this person's work. And my hope is that with the archives becoming available to the public eventually, that there will be a really huge amount of scholarship about his work, that there will be more artistic interpretations of his work, that his reputation will continue to grow and grow, and that he will be a person who is always part of the conversation when we're talking about the architectural history of Los Angeles, when we're talking about important Black figures in the United States, when we're talking about all of these things that he's really at the intersection of. This is a building on UCLA's campus. And UCLA is where I went to graduate school. This is the same building. And I actually moved here to Los Angeles to attend UCLA. So it was really special to photograph a Williams building on this campus, which was the first place I really got to know in Los Angeles. I didn't know how to drive when I moved here, and I actually didn't get my license until several years later when I was working on this project. So another thing about this project for me is that it helped me learn Los Angeles by car, and it gave me an excuse to go all around the city and to meet different kinds of people. That was a really, really exciting part of the work, and helped me feel at home here in LA and part of something larger than myself. This is a house in Ontario, California. It has been sold since the time that I photographed it, but it was in almost perfect condition. Here's a house here where I am nearby in the San Fernando Valley. These really fantastic mirrors in the dining room. This house is in Hancock Park. So just in these three images, actually this is in Miracle Mile more than Hancock Park, but just in those three photographs that were up as I was talking about it, you saw all these different car trips and these different years of me working on this project. Let's see, there's another one from that house in Ontario. I'm just checking the time. I'm about to wrap up and pass it along to Ravi. I just wanted to say that this project has been so much fun for me. I have learned so much about Los Angeles, about Williams, about the field of architecture. I don't know what the next part of this project will be for me, but I'm still compelled to work on it. I'm compelled to find some time to get into those archives and really dive into his work in a new way and figure out new ways to interpret it. Thank you, everyone. And Ravi, hello. I'm excited to hear you talk.
Hi, Jana. I'm always so moved by your photographs, and as an architect, I'm thankful that you bring this view as an artist, because you see different details, or you see the same details in a different way, and you catch the atmosphere of these houses and places in such a magical way. So thank you, Jana. I'll speak briefly. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay. Full screen. Okay. So I'll speak briefly about Paul Williams's own home. that my firm, Escher Gunawardena Architecture, with my partner Frank Escher, is restoring. And looking carefully at particular design elements of the house to identify their possible origin. And then I'll speak a little bit about the restoration process underway and finish with the comparison of Paul Williams's work compared to other notable architects of his time. When Paul Williams built his own home in 1952, he was already a well-established and respected architect. He had completed several hotel projects in the previous decades, including the Beverly Hills Hotel, several mid-rise tower buildings, and dozens of houses for notable Hollywood celebrities. He and his wife, Della, were in their late 50s, and their daughters were adults at this time. So the house was designed for an affluent middle-aged couple. The house also in a way defies simple categorization. It has been described as being international style, streamlined, modern, and could even be seen in the vein of tropical modernism. After decades of working in historicist styles, this house for himself was decidedly modern. From the exterior, one can identify the modernist elements. The broad cantilevered roof and balcony can be traced in American architecture to Frank Lloyd Wright. The wood-clad balcony is found in numerous Wright projects. Here, the 1939 wing spread, a house he designed for Herbert Johnson. I'm sorry, this one. The house he designed for Herbert Johnson in Racine, Wisconsin. And locally, the George D. Sturgis House in Brentwood. The tray-shaped balconies splayed inward or out was a signature element used repeatedly by other modernists in the 20th century, from John Lautner to A. Quincy Jones and Whitney Smith. Here you see the Pilot House from around 1950. The ribbon windows of the Lanai. The Lanai is this curving room that you see on to your right here. The ribbon windows separating the mass of the balcony from the walls below are again a modernist device, often associated with the international style. The particular shape of the plan of the Lanai. So here you see the plan, and the entrance is to your left, this brick paved patio. You come into the entry hall, which has a circular ceiling and circular stair that takes you upstairs. And straight ahead would be the living room. And to your right would be the Lanai with this beautiful curving wall that then takes you to the outdoors, both the living room and the Lanai open to the outdoor garden. And then towards the front of the house is this volume, which has the dining room. And then all the service quarters are along the north side. The particular shape and the plan of the Lanai contained in the rectangle of a balcony, I found to be an interesting development of Williams's own making. I was especially interested in the origin of these curves in various Williams projects and explored what might have informed this gesture. While similar juxtapositions of curves and rigid geometry appeared throughout the 20th century, it's unlikely that those are related to Williams's curves. Here you see the organic curves that appeared in the that appeared also later in the 1960s, amoeba-shaped swimming pools. And that can be traced to the 1948 Donnell House by landscape architect Thomas Church, Lawrence Halprin, and George Rockrice. Church was exposed to these organic forms through Alvar Aalto, who he met during one of Aalto's American tours. Aalto's shapes can be traced, or the shape of Aalto's amoeboid shape can be traced to the Villa Mairea and to his early development of the Savoy vase, the well-known curved glass vase that was produced by Alto. Both the vase and these curving shapes made appearances in America in the 1939 MoMA exhibition and in the Finnish Pavilion by Alto in 1939 at the World's Fair in New York. There's a possibility that Williams would have seen these highly published works, but they seem to be of a different ilk. Could Williams have encountered the work of Oscar Niemeyer during his travels to Latin America? But the seminal work of Niemeyer, the Casa das Canoas, later from 1951, later than Williams's use of these curves. But what you do find very early in Williams's own work, even from the 1920s and 30s, are these sensuous curves evolving from stair forms and the ceiling plane. An average client who may have commissioned a Georgian revival or a Spanish colonial house may not have noticed that Williams was developing a modernism of his own. These curves quietly reveal that those houses are not purely historical recreations. He used them to great effect in the ceilings of his department store projects, in restaurants and homes. Here, the porte cochere of the Hotel Nutibara in Medellin. In Medellin, Colombia, a great work of Art Deco splendor envisioned in 1937 and completed in 1945. You'll see the shaped elements as we enter Williams's own house and the stair hall in the stair hall in plan and ceiling plane, curves and counter curves flowing seamlessly into rigid shapes, much as one would find in forms within the Japanese garden, the soft forms within the rectilinear confines. Straight ahead of the entry hall, a curved entry leads you into the more formal sitting room and the living room the sitting area of the living room and its angular geometries reflected in the ceiling plane. Forming an L shape, defining the courtyard, the less formal lanai is to the right of the entrance. The wall curvature is both elegant in plan and experientially. During the day, daylight from the band of jalousie windows perfectly balances the light from the large windows facing the patio. Structural columns are embedded in the wall, barely visible in the band of glass. The dining room creates the third leg of the circular entry hall before one takes the stair up to the bedroom level. As I mentioned earlier, the kitchen, breakfast, and laundry areas are to the north, and on the upper floor are two large bedrooms that each have their large balconies. And here you see upstairs, this is the former study of Paul Williams, which will become a library, and a guest bedroom, and then the master bedroom with the dressing area along the back, and a former hair salon, which will be converted into a new master bathroom. Each of the bedrooms have views onto these in generous balcony decks with the airiness of a ship's prow floating above the gardens of the neighborhood. Our client bought the house directly from the Williams family, and the house had been very well looked after and was overall in fairly good condition. However, like any other 70-year-old house, certain structural and infrastructural issues needed to be addressed. Our approach is to carefully restore the house as invisibly as possible. We are in the process of updating the electrical, the plumbing, and mechanical systems, restoring and repairing windows, and correcting structural related issues. One enormous challenge is that we have not so far located the original construction documents. Often a set of prints is given to an owner of a house, but in this case, since the house was built for the architect himself, the drawings were likely kept in his office. We're hoping that they might somehow be discovered among the cache of drawings that was recently placed with the Getty Research Institute and USC. For our work, we carefully surveyed the entire house and recreated a set of as-built drawings, but details on the foundation or construction often require a certain amount of archaeology and excavation. Various structural issues are being resolved. In the living room, the ground had slowly settled over the last 70 years due to water infiltration beneath the ground and causing invisible damage and dipping the floor slab nearly 4 inches at one end of the room. We had to remove the entire slab to gain visual access to the foundation and replace portions of the foundation while underpinning the 2-story structure above. Areas of the lower floor that were originally carpeted will have a poured in place pale sage green concrete floor. In the kitchen, the original St. Charles kitchen cabinets will be restored and the floor will be replaced with a solid color linoleum similar to the original flooring. The lanai needs some amount of work in the brick walls that were exposed to moisture from rain and garden sprinklers. Again, these are not issues that are visible to most lay people, but with the team of specialists, these are discovered in the exploration stage during the conservation project. Our goal is to help the house survive for generations into the future. The work is being carefully executed by Bonomo Construction and coordinated by our project manager, Tessa Watson, and is scheduled to be completed this summer. The topic has risen of late as to where to place Williams in the pantheon of American architects. And the relevance of his historicist architecture to the 20th century is being discussed. This is a larger discussion demanding a symposium of its own, but I'd like here to examine some aspects of Williams' work in comparison to a few of his contemporaries active in Southern California. I start with this preface that Williams was not alone in his foray into period styles. It's well known that Frank Lloyd Wright, in his early work, produced designs in shingle style, in Queen Anne, and revival styles. The George Blossom House on the right here of 1892 was a colonial revival style with Ionic columned porch and Palladian windows. The Nathan G. Moore House in Oak Park, around the corner from Wright's own home, was more clearly a Tudor revival style, the version on the left as you see it, until an electrical fire allowed Wright the opportunity to remodel it with an extended roof and deep overhangs, the version on the right. More in keeping, I'm sorry, Frank is advancing the slides here. More in keeping with his later prairie home principles. Many of these houses were eclectic as well. The second version of the Moore House at Wright combined Tudor, Gothic, Sullivanesque, and even Mayan details. Similarly, Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier had gone through their own era of historicist or regional style designs before arriving at the strictly modernist works that they are most associated with. Compared to European modernists such as Schindler and Neutra, who made their way to Los Angeles in the 1920s, and the second generation modernists like Gregory Ain, Rafael Soriano, and others, Williams' formation as an architect would have been quite different. His education in architecture would not have stemmed from a dogma or manifesto that his work would conform to for the entirety of his career. This would involve a rejection of an entire body of work of his predecessors, the late 19th century architects that Williams admired. Williams's early professional role models would instead have been people like William Sidney Pittman, Julian Francis Abel, Reginald Johnson, George Washington Smith, or John Austin, gentlemen architects with Beaux-Arts training catering to wealthy clients. Williams did not come from a position of privilege. He was not entitled to his education by birthright or social class. He would instead have to strive for a place among these men in positions of power for the better part of his life and career. Women architects such as Julia Morgan also had a difficult time breaking into this elite men's club. Fortunately, a few of these men were open enough to let Williams demonstrate his abilities. Many of their clients had newly made money and demanded that their architects create an aura of wealth and history to complement their gains. Like these older generation architects, Williams and his exact contemporary Wallace Neff continued to create work in historic styles, Tudor, Georgian, and classical revival and mission styles. Neff, less eclectic than Williams, nonetheless introduced compositional elements from modernism into his historical and vernacular style buildings. Note here the hybrid Spanish streamlined modern stair in Neff's own home of 1928 in San Marino. The two architects who created homes for the milieu of Hollywood clients were friends later in life and collaborated on a series of proposals for airform houses, also known as the bubble houses, to be placed in housing developments in Las Vegas, in Native American reservations and military bases. Though none of those projects came to fruition, hundreds of the airform houses were later built in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The largest project of 1,200 units was in Senegal. In public and institutional projects, however, Williams had more latitude to deploy modernist attitudes. Commissions for the Roosevelt Naval Base in Long Beach allowed Williams and associate architects such as Adrian Wilson to create a series of beautiful buildings based strictly on functionalism, yet conveying a refinement and polish of authority. Here, the Fleet Officers Lounge in one of the buildings. Williams continued to flirt with modernism and introduce modern forms, techniques, and treatments, even into his historicist style houses. In 1935, he presented a steel house, which Stephen G. spoke about a few minutes ago, dressed in vernacular designs, alongside the clearly modernist house by Richard Neutra at this housing exposition, which was covered in Architectural Digest side by side in facing pages. So he was well aware of the current explorations in architecture. In his own pair of small books, Small Homes for Tomorrow and New Homes for Today, he explored new modes of living. Included in one of these books was a contribution by Richard Neutra, who presented a plan with perhaps more flair than the strict geometries of his other built works. Other plans presented in Williams' book included case studies for compact living with open plans that flowed out into the gardens and courtyards behind the house. Glamorous Art Deco rooms and open tread spiral stairs perhaps surreptitiously made their way into still somewhat conservative house plans. The opulent mixture speaks more of Hollywood films than modernist dogma. After all, in a self-referential conundrum, he designed the domestic settings for the daily lives of the same cast of characters who appeared in movie sets, that were designed by the likes of Cedric Gibbons, shown here, or John Hardiker. Williams continued to innovate in his own manner. Here, in the 1937 den of actor Charles Correll's 1,200 square foot Georgian colonial mansion, Williams fitted a beautiful Art Deco room. Perhaps reflecting a post-war optimism, a point of departure from the historical stance appears in the mid-1940s, beginning with that series of collaborations with his younger mentee, A. Quincy Jones. These are more public buildings, the Palm Springs Tennis Club shown here, and the Town and Country Shopping Center, for which Williams appears listed as the principal architect and Jones as associate. His own home, built in the mid-50s, showed these modernist influences mentioned earlier, melded with eclectic elements that his clients would expect from him. A second house shortly thereafter, for the client, Dr. Jackson Farham Taylor, just a block away, shows variations on the elements that Williams used in his own home. This photo is by Jonna Williams, by the way. A series of homes in the period that follows goes in the direction of modern ranch style, long, low roofed houses that spread luxuriously among swimming pools and patios. Here, the house for Lucille Ball, back one, yeah, and Desi Arnaz in Palm Springs. And here, the house for Frank Sinatra in Beverly Hills. Projects in Las Vegas in the 1960s, a racetrack, a workers' housing development, 2 hotels, and a church employed the most current construction techniques. Between 1952 and the early 60s, the work of Spanish-Mexican architect Felix Candela had recently been widely published, presenting techniques of thin shell, fiber-reinforced concrete for the construction of pavilions, churches, and other buildings. One cannot ignore the fact that Williams had done several projects in Central America at this point and would have been traveling to places where he might have encountered the work of people like Candela or met the engineer himself. Architect John Lautner later collaborated with Candela on the design of a concrete shell house for Bob Hope in Palm Springs. Williams's degree from USC was in architectural engineering. Did Williams design all of his own structures, or did he collaborate with other engineers? Here is the that's a project by Candela. And here is the Paul Williams design of La Concha Hotel in Las Vegas. These structures were not merely developed to catch attention, but to demonstrate the new possibilities of roof spans without columns, simply by employing self-supporting hyperbolic paraboloid shapes or folded roof forms, much the same as the catenary arch was employed in Gothic cathedrals in the medieval period. For these adventuresome clients willing to gamble on Williams, he was able to experiment with the latest of engineering techniques.
Hey, Ravi, this is Chris. We're going to have to wrap up your presentation so we can get to some Q&A.
Okay.
Do you have concluding words?
Actually, and this is a perfect time to finish up, and this just shows the final project, which is the Church of St. Viator in Las Vegas. And his final decade presented some very exciting works, and it'll be interesting to discover what else is discovered in Williams's archives when it opens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I didn't want to interrupt because it was so interesting, but we only have an hour, and we want to get. We'll extend the time by about 5 minutes so we can get to all the Q&A. All the panelists can go ahead and turn on your video. I wanted to be sure to thank our sponsor for this Modernist series, U.S. Modernist Radio, and I put the link in the chat earlier. And then also I wanted to thank Docomomo US for being our partner on the Modernist series. And I just want to also mention, in case anyone has to go at the top of the hour, that we have one more in this series of 5 programs, and that will be a professional webinar with Gunny Harbo, Katie Horak, and Flora Chow on Thursday for a 3-hour professional seminar on modernism methods. And as you know, Gunny worked on Crown Hall and Unity Temple by Frank Lloyd Wright. And that is a paid seminar, but you can get CEUs. All right, John, do you have any, we want to start with a question?
Oh boy, do we have questions. So I'll try to start here with one that really was compelling to me. And the question from Jay is, well, maybe I'll roll this into a few questions. So Paul Williams, as many of us know, is the architect of the star, known as the architect of the stars, right? But the question from Jay is wondering, was Williams involved in movie set design?
I don't know if him being involved in movie set design. He was involved in an AIA panel that worked on a film that I'm struggling for the title of. It's Mr. Blanding's House. It had a whole bunch of stars in it. Williams was brought in as an advisor on the movie. So it was, I believe, I might get this slightly wrong, but I believe the film was about a guy who wanted to design his own house. So I think Williams, Beckett, and a few others were brought in to basically make sure they didn't embarrass themselves.
Great. There was another question about his residence that Ravi went into detail on. And this is about the sort of unique style that we saw in his residence. And I noticed that too. And you sort of went into it, Ravi, a bit, is in terms of his departure from that neoclassical sort of historicist style. And the question was, what projects, if any, expanded upon the decidedly modern and unique style found in his own residence? And can you trace a lineage to some final or ultimate structure that represents Williams' own unique sort of design ethos?
Well, it's difficult to say that he preferred one over the other, but definitely from the early 50s, he veers towards these modernist designs. And so the Hiram Jackson house that we saw, that's very similar to Williams's own house and nearby, was a great example of that, as well as these houses for Sinatra and Lucille Ball, that are more related to and in a way trying to create his own style of California modernism. That's a mixture of the ranch style, the low slung roofs, and with the opening to the rear yards, and this kind of lifestyle.
Thanks,
Great.
Robbie. We lost your sound a little bit at the end. So I wanted to ask a question about public housing in Los Angeles. We have a question from Dorothy. Why did Williams not design and build more public housing? Apparently, it's the only one that he did was at Nickerson Gardens. If one of you would like to answer that question.
I think that's a fantastic question that you could probably write an entire book about. These projects were enormously complex and required a lot of government goodwill, a lot of different agency goodwill. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I think it would be a fascinating question to explore at length. I mean, the fact that you could design something like Pueblo del Rio and be, encouraged to inform it with modern design and work with some of the leading architects of the period would just be a fascinating point to start off a study project. But I know that doesn't answer your question, but it's a great question.
And there were other completed housing projects. One in Henderson, Nevada, for example, was a large project with 400 units. Yeah, a good source for this is the Paul R. Williams Project, a website that documented the majority of his works, and you can search by category in there.
So I have a question coming from Yvonne Marie, and she's asking, was Williams his own draftsman and renderer? I don't know if anybody mentioned that, but maybe you can elaborate on that a bit more.
Well, I mean, he would have been early on in his career. I guess like any other architect, once you get successful, you delegate a lot of work to other people. I thought it was interesting that Jay Johnson, who worked for Williams, said that, you know, even though, you know, Williams was delegating these projects to other folks in his office, nothing that came out of Williams didn't have his signature touch on it somewhere. You know, so I don't think, you know, there's any project that's linked to Williams' name that he wasn't ultimately responsible for, you know, in a way that he would have had, you know, a complete level of control. If that answers your question.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I wanted to mention that Rita said that Williams also worked on Gonzaga Village in Watts as well. And while we were talking about Watts, I did post a photograph in our pre-roll about two African-American architects, Kennard and Silvers, who were actually born in Watts and graduated from the USC Architecture School. And one of their buildings, the Mafundi building in Los Angeles in Watts, is something that everyone should take a peek at. It's a beautiful painted mural, and it is in the modernist style. And I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to also highlight other African-American architects in Los Angeles. I'll post a couple things in the chat in just a second so you can find more information about the Friends at Mafundi, and the LA Conservancy has a page about that. So my next question, then we'll go to John, and we'll wrap it up in about 2 minutes, everybody. So let's see. I saw one about here in La Concha. Okay, in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Ravi, you posted some. You talked about this. Was Williams responsible for the La Concha in San Juan, Puerto Rico, as well as the one that we're more familiar with?
I'm not familiar with that particular building, but there was a restaurant also with this shell shape by Candela in Mexico, so I'm dying to see what's in the archives when it finally opens, to see if there's a collaboration between these two characters, or and what one finds further about these shell buildings.
So this question is for Jana, actually. Jana, beautiful photographs, first of all. There were a lot of comments on your photographs, and generally, a lot of people had some questions about, or not really questions, they were just impressed that you had interior access to a lot of these buildings and were able to photograph them from a unique perspective that others often don't see. But my question for you really is, if there are any particular elements that you're drawn to of Mr. Williams' architecture that you feel drawn to as a photographer, whether it's the sort of these neoclassical columns or the arches or the curvy modern sort of elements of some of these buildings, what do you think draws you the most as an artist and photographer?
Thank you for the kind words about the work. I find myself again and again drawn to corners and places where ceilings and walls fit together, or places where different rooms come together. I look at those a lot. I look at the decorative curves a lot. And I love looking at different staircases next to each other. One thing that he's really well known for are these kind of grand sweeping staircases, but there are also so many other kinds of staircases. And I think that those are, staircases are a functional thing that can look different. So they're looking at different staircases is another way for me to look at his range and just compare the different styles that he could work in really quickly.
Great, thanks, Jonna. I'm going to wrap up. I wanted to just sort of capture what we've had in the chat and the Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for being so active. I really have fun in the chat room with everyone, and I know that I saw a couple of people found their friends there. One thing someone says, did William have disciples? That they have a Cape Cod house in Miracle Mile that's said to be in the style of Paul Williams. We see that a lot. It'll be in the style of Neutra or the style of Eames. And, you know, I think that's just, maybe that's good, because when we can have these names and these ideas start to penetrate that real estate market, maybe it helps save some of these other buildings. And then I want to also mention that Steve Keelan and Katie Horak wrote a historic context statement for the garden apartments of Los Angeles. I put the link to that in the chat. And I think we need to wrap up, right, John? Did you want to? I want to thank all the panelists so much, because this was such an amazing program, and the information that you gave us today was just unbelievable. And thank you for that. And thank you for your time. All right, John, it's up to you now.
So I'm here to be the bad guy and say goodbye to everybody. But before I do so, I was really, what was burning at me was seeing one of the images that Ravi showed in the Lanai. And there were two pillows on the couch that had the initials K and D on them. And I'm wondering if any of you have an answer to why those initials were on the couch.
Should I do it?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. The owner of the home after Williams and his wife died was their granddaughter, Karen Hudson. So that would be the K.
Oh, okay. I thought it was something like that, but I just wanted to confirm. I was really curious. But thank you all for attending today. In the chat box, I pasted the link to the evaluation form to today. So let us know how we did, and also what you'd like to see in future programs. As Christine mentioned earlier, we have one more program in this series, and we encourage you to join. And we have a coupon code for that, which is called, which is Mod Squad in all caps, and that'll get you $15 off that program. And it offers AIA units, HSW units also, if you're looking for those health safety welfare credits. So thank you to our speakers today. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. And as mentioned earlier, this is recorded, so it'll be available on our YouTube and Facebook page.
And before you wrap up, though, John, I'd like to mention that all of these free programs we are making free and available to everybody, because all of our donors are helping us with that. And I'd really like to encourage everybody, if you're so inclined, to donate to CPF, and also think about membership in our organization. We have our annual conference is coming up in the first week, I think June 7 through 10. And we're going to be announcing more details on that very soon, and we'd like everyone to participate. All right, John, now it's back to you.
Okay, so I will leave the room open, but our speakers are welcome to leave now or turn off their videos if they'd like. The chat box will remain open for you to review some of these links and also to leave feedback. So thank you all for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, see you soon.